Shadow Priest versus Beast Druid. I'm Uncorrupt, and with the help of hsreplay.net, I'm going to be breaking down the replay turn by turn, explaining exactly what I was thinking and why I was doing what I was doing in this matchup. We're going to start off just by taking a look at the mulligan here. And I actually assumed that my opponent was Ramp Druid. I've been seeing more Ramp Druid recently on the ladder than Beast Druid or really any other type of aggro Druid. And so that was the assumption that I made. And really, anytime that you're in the mulligan, you're having to make an assumption about the deck your opponent is playing, and it's best to just go with the percentages. Most recently, everybody basically has been playing Ramp, so that's what I wanted to mulligan for. So taking a look at the mulligan here, I keep the Cult Neophyte. Cult Neophyte is just extremely strong against Ramp Druid, which is why I kept that card. It's just so good to be able to delay their ramping turn. You know, if you can play it on going into their turn 4 so that they can't overgrowth. You can just disrupt the things that they really want to do to be able to try to get ahead of you. So I kept the Cult Neophyte, and then I mulliganed both Tour Guides, and of course Benedictus. I would never keep this card no matter the matchup. What I would have done if I had had the knowledge that I was playing Beast Druid is I would have actually kept a Tour Guide. I like keeping Tour Guide against other aggro decks simply because having the free hero power can allow you to potentially remove another minion. It helps you fight for the board while developing a 1/1, and it just ends up helping us get ahead. Since I assumed it was Ramp Druid, I mulliganed all of those and just kept the Cult Neophyte here. And so we get into, here we're into turn 1. I'm on the coin, so really just waiting to see what my opponent does. And then I believe he actually plays Sow the Soil right off the bat here. And he does. So now that my opponent has played Sow the Soil, I realize that I'm against another aggro deck. And at this point I've kind of realized, oh no, I haven't mulliganed correctly. So when I realize that I'm against another aggro deck, I'm thinking to myself, I need to fight for the board. As Shadow Priest against another aggro deck, you have to fight for the board unless it just no longer becomes feasible that you can take the board back. A lot of times, I feel like my opponents play incorrectly against Shadow Priest because they don't fight for the board hard enough. If we can actually get a board presence, and our opponent, continues to go face because they think they can race us, if we're able to control the board and have minions on the board, at some point we just have total board control, the opponent can't take it back, and then we start to play like, say, Void Touched Attendant or maybe Raise Dead to get an attendant back, and then we can just push so much damage face that they end up losing the race. So I feel like it's misplayed a lot of times from the other side of the board here. So on turn 1 you can see I throw out the Void Touched Attendant that we have in hand, and then I also coined out the Peasant. So the reason why I coin out the Peasant here is I think to myself, if my opponent just hero powers and attacks the Peasant, then they don't develop anything, which allows me to maintain at least a somewhat decent position on the board. They could trade into the Void Touched Attendant and hero power to kill the Attendant, which would leave them with a 2/1, and then I would have the Peasant on the board. So if Peasant sticks, it gets to draw a card. If Peasant doesn't stick, then we still have our Void Touched Attendant, and then if they make the trade like this and they develop something else, potentially we're still even on the board with 1 minion our side and 1 minion on their side. So it felt like with the hand that I had, this was going to be the way to play it. And then of course, if they just ignore the minions on board, then I've got Wriggling Horror the following turn. So you can see our opponent here actually hits me in the face and makes the hero power and kills the Peasant. We draw another Wriggling Horror here, so the play for me was really just hero power to clear their 2/2, and now we have board, at least temporarily, even though our board is actually just a little bit weak. Then of course we're going to attack face, get a nice little 2 damage in on our opponent. So the opponent here has definitely a strong turn, but also a questionable decision from their side. So they play the Thorngrowth Sentries, they get the 2/1/2s with Taunt. I can't really kill either one of those with my Void Touched Attendant, so definitely a solid play there. And then they play Druid of the Reef, the 3/1 with Rush, but they don't make this trade, which I find to be a little bit curious. You really want to fight for the board in these aggro board-based matchups. They choose not to, assuming that they'll be able to kill the Void Touched Attendant, and they can still maintain the 3/1, I assume, to be able to get more face damage, or maybe they're thinking there's going to be a higher priority target on the board that they would have that 3 damage available for. So You can also see they made this play versus just playing Frostwolf Kennels, which would be a little bit slower immediately, but probably a little bit more tempo in the coming turns. So as we get into to our turn here, top deck Serena Bloodfeather. So ultimately, I just hero power down the 3-1. I want to make sure that they don't get the easy trade there. And unfortunately, my hand is full of 2-drops, so hero power was all I was able to do on this turn. And of course, I choose not to attack because if I attack, then they can, he could make this attack and hero power trade. This felt like this was the best way to be able to maintain my Void Touch Attendant on the board. And I don't really mind taking damage to the face in these aggro matchups. It's really all about fighting for the board. So our opponent goes face twice, as you can see here. And then he develops the Frostwolf Kennels. So at this point, I'm starting to think my opponent is starting to spread out a little bit, getting a little bit wide on the board. I'm going to be wary of composting. I don't want them to be able to compost and draw a bunch of cards. Typically, if you can deny the card draw of these aggro Druid decks, they could potentially run out of steam, especially if you're able to make favorable trades, maybe remove minions with the hero power. Top deck here is going to be Cult Neophyte, which, as you can see, we put in play. And then the Wriggling Horror allows us to buff both of those minions. Now we have a favorable trade with the Attendant, going to be able to kill one of these Thornguard Turtles. So again, we're just fighting for the board here. This will die to a hero power, but if our opponent is spending 2 mana on a hero power, we're going to take that as a win for the turn. It's just slow. It doesn't really do a lot. And then also, this will still be a 2-3, and this will be a 4-3, so he would have to trade 2-1, 2 of his minions to be able to kill one of these. And it just puts us in a significantly stronger board position. So this ended up being a really good turn from our side of the board here. And of course, we make the trade there, as I mentioned. So our opponent plays Frostsaber Matriarch, get the big 4/5 taunt on the board, at least big compared to what we have. And then he's actually going to hero power and punch into our 2-1. So never really got to see what these cards were, as you can tell by the replay here, so I don't know what his options were. On 5 mana, he may have actually been better off just playing the Arbor up here, because it would give him an additional 2 minions, and then he would be able to... actually, he could potentially even value trade like this, and then this guy could kill one of those minions. So, again, I think just a little bit of a misplay here. Our opponent likely would have been better off playing the Arbor up than what he did. But he was thinking that I would be trading 2-1 into this, or that it could possibly even stick around if I choose not to attack. So we see our opponent, he's going to kill our 2-1 here. So beginning the turn, and he's going to be going face. He punches us in the face. Of course, Void Touch Attendant's on the board, so he's aggressively attacking our health total. So now we're at 18. Our opponent's still at 24. And he feels pretty good about his board position, and likely he's thinking he's going to Arbor up next turn, I guess just to have most possible impact for the Arbor up. So, and then of course he summons the 2-2 because he still has the Frostwolf Kennels active. So we top deck Mancrick here. This play actually felt pretty straightforward when I was playing it in the game. Serena Bloodfeather is going to take away a lot of the stats on the Frostsaber Matriarch, and we're going to be able to get a favorable trade against that. And then it also develops a little bit bigger size minion, at least relative to what's on the board. And then also just playing the Mancrick out, the 3 mana 3/4, we're able to spend all 5 of our mana nicely. We get the wife shuffled into the deck, and really strengthen our board position. So we're going to see that play out here. This goes to a 2-2, and then we just make 2 value trades against our opponents, and the Mancrick comes down. So you can see with each turn. My priority has been to take value trades and fight for the board as much as possible. And I don't really mind that my opponent is attacking my health total. So, of course, our health is another resource that we have access to in Hearthstone. I don't mind sacrificing my health as long as it doesn't go down to 0, of course. But really just strengthening our position on the board, which is where we're going to win from. And then our opponent, of course, playing an aggro Druid, they don't really have burst from hand outside of Arbor up. And the only way that Arbor up is going to be burst from hand is if they have an existing board to play it on. So again, if I fight for the board long enough and hard enough, once I take the board so that my opponent can no longer stick minions, he'll no longer be able to damage my face, meaning my health total is irrelevant, and he won't be able to land a composting. he won't be able to land an Arbor up. So continuing here into turn 6, and we see our opponent, he's actually going to play the Arbor up, only going, of course, on these 2 minions, and then he's going to get the additional minions off of this as well. So our opponent now, instead of trading, makes the choice to actually go face. So you can see Void Touch Attendant still on the board, and we take 10. This sets our health total down to 8. And, you know, again, when I was in the game, I was happy to see this because I'm going to be able to make some value trades. I know that I have Wriggling Horror in hand. I can buff these guys, trade. This is going to make a trade. I could potentially Hero Power and trade the Void Touched. But I feel pretty good that I'm going to be able to have control of the board again after this turn. So not super concerned that my health total is going down. And really, as I'm seeing this, before I even get my card out of my next drawn card going into my turn, I'm already thinking, okay, I'm going to be able to trade for the board. Health is getting low, but it's not that big a deal. I feel like I'm pretty close to just having the board locked down to where my opponent will no longer feasibly be able to fight for the board, even if they want to. And quite honestly, the opponent just never acted like they wanted to fight for the board in this game for most of the turns that they've taken. So as we continue the replay here, this is going to be the third and final Frostwolf cub that comes down, and you see our opponent is sitting pretty here. And this actually ends up being the last turn of the game. I don't know what cards our opponent had in their hand, so coming into the turn, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be able to, you know, get some buffs down with Wriggling Horror. I'm going to take some value trades, and I'm going to try to set myself up for, you know, just really locking the board down and not taking any more damage. So again, my health is low. I don't super care, but now I have to be really careful about how much damage my opponent is able to put out on the board. So coming into the turn, that was my thought process. And then, of course, the top deck ends up being Defias Leper. So you can see here just from how long this turn is, it took me a little bit of time to execute this turn. And the reason why is because I actually have lethal here. So originally, you know, I'm considering the line of, you know, buff the 3/4, and there's a Mancrick behind this Wriggling Horror here. And as you can see there, so originally I'm thinking, okay, you know, buff these guys, make the trades, fight for the board. He's still going to have a 2/2 left, but it's not that big a deal, you know, given the rest of the things that are going on here. And so then I realized, wait a second, I'm presenting 6, 9, 12 damage on board. And then, of course, this is actually 16 damage on board because of the Void Touched Attendant. And so then I began to check my hand and think things through. Do I have lethal here? And, of course, the answer is actually yes. 16 on board. Hero Power is going to be 3 for 19. The Defias Leper is active because we have a Shadow spell in the deck. That's going to put us to 22. And then Wriggling Horror, landing a buff on 2 minions, is going to give us exactly 24 to be able to finish our opponent here. So we're going to see that play out. Ended up just being super clean, and this is a perfect example of what I feel like happens a lot when my aggro opponent misplays against Shadow Priest. So what happened was, you know, we spent the entire game fighting our opponent for board control. As you can see, the Hero Power is going to finish him off right there. We fought the entire game for board control. Our opponent tended to more ignore board and push damage face. So yes, he set us down low. The line that they took was, I'm going to turn this into a face race. And the problem is, Shadow Priest can just generate so much damage. You know, we have damage from Hero Power, potentially damage from hand with things like the Void Shard that deals 4 damage. At any time, we could pull Wife out of the deck, Mancrick's Wife, that's going to go face for actually 4 if we have Void Touched Attendant. And of course, we're also running Mr. Smite in the deck as well. Shadow Priest can just generate a lot of damage. So if you have an existing board and you have a Void Touched Attendant, or if there's a Void Touched Attendant in hand, or if we could potentially raise dead to get a Void Touched Attendant back that's previously died, you can just push so much damage face. And I see this play out a lot where an aggro opponent just doesn't fight hard enough for the board against Shadow Priest. So much damage. We did 24 damage in one turn. And if you're not paying attention, you know, you count the damage on board to start the turn. We only had 12 damage on board if you fail to take into account the Void Touched Attendant. So this was just a really, really solid game. Again, this seems to be how a lot of these aggro games play out, Shadow Priest versus aggro. So if you're playing against Shadow Priest, make sure you're fighting for the board. You don't want to try to turn it into a face race, or this same thing could potentially happen to you. And then, of course, if we're playing from the Shadow Priest side of the board, we want to fight for the board, and then we're going to have a turn where even if we don't lethal our opponent at a really high health total, 24, really high, at least in my opinion, you send so much damage face, your opponent's unable to set up lethal, and then, their board presence doesn't even allow them to be able to fight for the board. So all of a sudden, in one turn, we change from fighting for the board to face damage, either lethal this turn or to set up lethal on the following turn. And just keeping in mind, this Void Touch Attendant came down on turn 1, and, still here even on turn 6. Our opponent just ignored it the entire game. So, again, just possibly some questionable lines of play from the opponent. So that is the replay, that is the analysis. If you've enjoyed this style of video, make sure you hit me up in the comments. I don't know how well this is going to be received watching replays, but watching a replay in this fashion on hsreplay.net gives me more time to be able to talk about the plays, the reason why I made the plays, and what the outcome was. And then it also has the added benefit of information that if our opponent played those cards, we can see what was in their hand, and we can kind of determine whether or not our opponent took the optimal line as well, which again just helps me and hopefully you as well to just be able to think about the game and learn more about the game of Hearthstone. Thank you for watching. Good luck out on the ladder.